Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Credit Where Credit is Due event. My name's Dan Cox. I'm a record producer, mix engineer. I run Urchin Studios in Hackney, which is a very lovely studio. Perhaps not quite as lovely as this one, but it's very lovely nonetheless. For those of you that don't know, MPG, we're Music Producers Guild. We're an organisation and a community for record producers, mix engineers, mastering engineers, writer-producers, and the like. We're a not-for-profit organisation. We're volunteer-run by our members, for our members. And of course, thanks to the church for hosting us this evening. And now I would like to introduce our panellists. Well, I would like our panellists to introduce themselves, actually.
Hello. My name's Josh Jackson. I work for a company called JAXSTA. We are yet to launch, but we're an Australian-based startup launching a consumer-facing solution for credits, not dissimilar to the IMDb concept, but for the music industry. So making sure credits are accessible and publicly available in the digital ecosystem, in the absence of credits proliferating the digital space thus far. That's a bit of a convoluted description, but I'm sure I'll get another chance at that.
My name is Helienne Lindvall. I'm originally, or by trade, a songwriter, and I'm on the board of the Iris Academy, formerly BASCA. And I'm here because I work with VEVA Sounds. And VEVA is a platform, well, originally for the past like 14 years, they've been working with major labels and indie labels, verifying and archiving records and stems and putting metadata in and making sure that everything is delivered. So if you've produced records, certainly in America, I mean, it's quite new in Europe, but in the US, they've done all the major labels since the mid-previous decade. And now we're about to roll out a music creator-facing platform that is going to give the producers and musicians and engineers a chance to do add that metadata themselves, and also to collaborate and upload all their multi-tracks and stems and everything, and have that archived in there.
Yeah, my name is Niklas Molinder. I'm from Sweden, and
so am I.
Yeah, the Swedes. I started as a songwriter and music producer, and I've been doing that for more than 20 years. And at one point, me and my partner, we found 3 up-and-coming, really talented creators, songwriters, producers, and we signed them, started a publishing company. And I was naive, and I thought, wow, let's run a publishing company and a production house with my right hand and still continue produce and write music. And that's when I realized how deep and dark the whole of metadata is, and how hard it is to deal with, and how complicated it is. And for us creators, I mean, we focus on the speakers and the studio. We want to do the music, but we are so exposed for the importance of what we call data. So I came up with an idea of making a tool which makes it super easy for us creators to just collect the information we need to collect in the studio, and then all the complicated things that's going on in the background, identifiers, codes, all the data, that we make sure that the data gets to the right place and to the right person. And we've been around for like 4 or 5 years now, and finally we're getting progress. And the biggest news right now is that Pro Tools is going to build in our solution in Pro Tools, so we will be in the software. So it's going to be super easy for you to just add the data, and your managers, publishers, labels will automatically get the data. You don't have to do anything more.
Nicholas, I'm not sure you actually mentioned the name of your company.
Sorry, yeah. We started out as Audley, but that name was recently changed because of many reasons. I have 2 great partners. I started the company Audley together with Max Martin and Mr. Björn Ulvaeus from ABBA. So I got great company from the beginning. And the name Audley from the start actually came from audio lyrics, and when we started the company, all tech companies should end with ly, so Audley was the only available free .com domain, so that was the reason why we started the name. 1 year ago, Björn Ulvaeus from ABBA said to me, we were in a meeting, and he said, "By the way, Niklas, I hate the name, change it." So, okay, and I had it in mind for some time. And as I said, I've been a songwriter for many years, and I've been in studios, and every time I went to the studio, I went to a session. So I had the name in front of me all the time. So, but we felt it was the right time to change name. So on South by Southwest, we decided to launch the name change. So the company is now known as Session.
We went through a name change as well. So my name is Gebre Waddell. I'm CEO of Sound Credit. We have a plugin that you can use in the studio to collect metadata and information as you work. You set up a profile for yourself and you can easily check into recordings. We originally launched that plugin under the name RenM, which some of you may have had. And with that, we checked the social media accounts during the time after that launch, and there were more shares of RenM than there was of any other audio software or hardware in music history, as long as social media has been around. So we were doing tools for production at that time, as well as this plugin, and we started to focus squarely on credits and collecting this information in a way that's easy. So we built out the full platform, Sound Credit, and many of you know we launched that in October of last year, and it continues to gain traction. With Pro Tools, we'll also be in Pro Tools later this year, is the discussion that's there. And it's just continued to grow. And a bit about my background, I was a mastering engineer for years. I wrote the best-selling book on mastering, which was published by McGraw-Hill, which started my interest in metadata and information. As a mastering engineer, you're counseling a lot of people about this. You have to make sure that they know what to do next. And so that's how it began with me. And also got into plugin development around the time I was writing the book, and I did a plugin called Refinement that I licensed to Brainworks and Universal Audio. It became one of the best-selling mastering plugins on their platform. So good to meet you all. I'm from Memphis, and I'm president of the Recording Academy chapter in my region, and we do a lot of events like this, and it's almost like a family reunion. Like, you know these faces. And so, I always encourage people with these kinds of things, to talk to the people that you don't know, if there are any of those in the room. These things make up your community, so I encourage you to do that.
Thanks. I feel very untalented sitting on a panel with all you guys, engineers, writers, etc. Thought I had nothing in common with you, but actually I changed my name when I got married, so name changes we're in there. I'm Matt Phipps-Taylor. I work for PPL. Who's heard of PPL? Quick sense check. Hopefully nearly everybody. Good. Who's a member? Oh, really good. Great. If you're not a member, ask me about that afterwards. Hopefully you know what we do. We collect money for the use of recorded music on radio, TV, broadcasts, and for public performance in bars and clubs and pubs. And then we distribute that money to the people that own the music and performed on the music. So credits, the information about who did what is obviously hugely important to PPL. We have been gathering that information for a long, long time. And we're super keen on solutions that make gathering that information in a really good, clean way as easy as possible.
Cool, very good. I'm just going to kind of direct this to all of you, just to kind of start with the basics. Why are credits important? I mean, we kind of know, but I want to hear it from you guys. Why is this stuff important?
Well, beyond getting paid, which someone else can answer for. I mean, the way JAXSTA sees it, we see credits as fundamental to how you get your next gig, particularly if you're a performer, non-featured musician that doesn't have your credits on. They're not. That is how your CV. That's your CV of work. Your credits. So people. That's how you get your next gig.
To me, as a music creator, the getting paid part, that is really important, but the getting paid part. And when you realize that so much money falls between the cracks because the credits are not there. I've talked kind of off the record with people, certainly on the publishing side, where we had somebody from ICE being on a panel at the Irish Academy that said 20% of what they collect is unattributable. And then I talked to somebody at a major publisher who used to work there and said it's more like 30%. And then I talked to somebody who was still working at that major, and he said it was more like 40%. Now that's when I kind of get really concerned, and I think it is such a. I feel like I've opened the hood of a car, and there's like no engine in there, and I kind of can see how to put the cables in there to put an engine in there. So it's become, even though I'm a music creator, it's become such a passion for me to solve this and try to kind of sort this out. And all the way through, I mean, us as music creators, we have a responsibility. Let's face it, we're pretty shit at this. Metadata. I mean, really every music creator should be at a panel like this. But metadata is like the most unsexy word ever. So usually when we do events, it's like how to get paid and credited. And so you did the right thing about credit where credit is due. So it has to start with us, but there's a lot longer line where things can fall.
And it's in the excitement of a session, it is something which you can forget about until the point where everyone's left. And then you go, who was the name of that trumpet player who just came in? Or like someone maybe. So it's easily forgotten. Yeah. But.
And I mean, I would also, when we're talking about PPL and IPN numbers, and the amount of people that don't even know what an IPN number is, which is obviously for anybody who doesn't know here, is the identification, your ID as a performer, or an IPI number for you as a songwriter. Loads of people don't know that. I did a record with an artist, and we released it, and I went to him and I said, this is somebody who was in a boy band back in the late 90s, early noughties. And I said, I need your IPN number. He's like, my what? I said, your identification that gets you paid. He's like, I better get one of those. And I'm thinking, what?
No doubt. I'm from Memphis, and with when I was growing up, you meet musicians. You can hardly throw a rock in Memphis and not hit a guitar player. Like, everyone is involved in the music industry or has family members that are. And for me, in those early days, you would talk to people who maybe recorded on Stax Records, or maybe they went up to Detroit and were on some albums on Motown, and for them, they put their blood, sweat, and tears into cultivating the skills to get them on that record. And then the record comes out and they're not credited. The look in their eyes when they tell you about that record that they were on, but they didn't get the credits, it stuck with me. That's something I heard many times, and it really sticks with you. So with that, getting paid is important. For engineers, there's going to be less of that. You're getting paid what you get paid, your rate. But it helps you get that next job. It helps you establish your resume. It's just viscerally important. And I think that we all come from that. We know that those stories that are out there from our friends where they've missed that credit, and it really makes you want to do something about it.
I feel like I don't need to state the obvious for PPL. If we don't have that information, we can't pay out money. We collect, I think last year we collected £246 million. So, next 4 or 5 years, we're talking about £1 billion, all of which is paid out on the basis of data about what is the music that got played, who owns it, and who performed it. Anything that's missing in there, we're going to get stuck. Money's going to get stuck. We can't pay it out. So it's hugely important to us. It's a responsibility we take very seriously. We need good data in order to be able to make those payments as accurately and as quickly as possible.
You ask why it's important with credits, and there's different ways of seeing this. And if I really personal, I remember first time I was participating on a CD, and I can walk into a record store in London and see my name on a cover in another country, I was like, that was huge. I heard my name on the radio, not because I was writing a song that a huge artist was recording. Like, wow, that was everything to me. Then payment is secondarily, actually. That was so huge for me. And as you said, it gets your resume, it gets you new jobs. That's the most important thing we have. So, but then of course payments are linked to that, and we need, if our music creation is going to be a sustainable profession, we need to get paid. Otherwise, but hopefully later tonight we can get into, also, I mean, we say that we have rights, but we also have responsibilities, because we need to take care more of our own data, and we need to learn what we need to do. I don't think that we should even consider learn everything what's going on, because it gets so complicated in the background. And maybe we can try to sort out some of those things that were going on, and why it's important that we just let PPL, for example, know who you are, and not by name. You need to know the identifier, because names can be spelled different. And I have letters in my name that you guys don't even find on your keyboard, so how can you cannot even write my name. So it's so important to understand what you need to do. And if you're interested, dig deep, you're going to find things that you have no idea. I've been working with the right side of the music industry now for years, and I hear new acronyms and I hear new things every week. So it's very complicated, but we need to learn what we need to do and to get paid, because something needs to happen. We need to change. We as creators need to change, otherwise we don't have this sustainable future.
Yeah, and just to add to what you said about different spelling of names, of course, this is the music industry. People have artist names, people have aliases, producers have nicknames, or there's Tommy D, for example. I don't even know your second name, you know. So, yeah, it's just D. Yeah, there you go, exactly. But if he had a
name change,
exactly, yeah. But if he had a normal person's surname, then
no, you're absolutely right, because I get problems all the way across the line, because there are other Tommy Ds. And
right.
So I get that issue, and then you know, and people, I have a name Danvers, so I get Denver and Davis,
yeah.
And I get all kinds of shit, and I've always had it. And that's one of the reasons why I was drawn to this whole credit thing 15 years ago when we first started.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, but then, can I just add to that it's also a lot of people have the same name, and I was talking to a publisher where they had a songwriter named Jack Johnson, not the Jack Johnson in Hawaii, and they kept getting royalties for him. Right, the Jack Johnson, Hawaiian Jack Johnson's royalties. They, according to they said that they sent him back, but you know.
Yeah, and the same thing happens on streaming services as well. We have an artist here called Berry. Sorry to just pick you out there, but there's a number of other artists with the same name as well. So there's multiple ways that these things can get entangled, I suppose. So why have things been in... Is mess the right word? I'm going to use the word mess. Why have all these things related to credits been in such a mess? Nicholas mentioned, when you could hold a CD in your hand or a vinyl record, and your credits were there and your name was written there, you could, that's a tangible thing. You go, there it is. I can hand that to you, and you can see that I've made the record. But as we've moved into the kind of the digital age of consuming music, first downloads and now streaming, what's happened to all of this? Where's this information getting lost? Because it was there. It was written on the CDs, and now it's disappeared. It appears in patchy forms sometimes, a little bit here on one platform and in a different way on another platform. How have we sort of got to this? You don't need to point any fingers point out any bad guys.
I see one clear thing that happened, and interestingly enough, that the people that really needs this data is the same people that needed it back in the days when we had CDs and physical media, A&Rs, labels, publishers, and so on. But as a producer, the person that chased me to death about this information was the graphic designer for the cover art. For real. That was actually what happened back when we were physical, because all the information was supposed to be on the CD cover and in the booklet, and the graphic designer was responsible for get all this information done. So that was the person that almost all the time I gave the data to. And then the data got from the cover art to the label and for registration. So that is to me a very...
That's really interesting, because I actually hadn't thought about that, but it's a very simple mechanism. If someone's got produced by blank, they go, well, I can't finish this until I've got the answer.
I think Nicholas is making a really good point, because it's about incentives, and I think that's what has kind of gotten lost. Even though it was an incentive that that is surprising, at the moment, where is the incentive to collect that data? And
from the labels' point of view.
From the labels, but the labels will have data. But where is the incentive for accurate data on their behalf? Because it doesn't really, it's no skin off their nose if they have, the wrong Tommy D or well, actually, probably with the producer, it will make a difference. But when it comes to the musicians that are performing or the engineers and all that, I think that is one of the reasons, or a really important reason. Who has that incentive? The ones that have the incentive are not the ones that are actually in the end are responsible for it being displayed. And then secondly, I think because DSPs had no way of displaying it, so there was no way of ingesting that data. So that whole part got cut off because you didn't have mainly the DSP or whoever is doing the interface for the DSP would be the album designer.
I'm going to do a little bit of this as we go on. Just a bit of jargon busting. DSP for the benefit of the audience.
Digital service provider. So Spotify, Apple, Tidal, all those.
Yeah, so wherever we encounter an acronym, because there's so many that we can bump into as we go through this.
We should maybe do a dictionary of all the acronyms.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we don't want to be here all night explaining what ISNIs are and things like that, but if we could just, whenever we come across an acronym, if you could just explain, if not what it stands for, then what it actually means.
I think this DSP thing is a bit chicken and egg, though, isn't it? Because why, if you were a massive corporate digital service provider and it's expensive, right? Modifying your platform that's available to potentially millions of users. Why would you do that if there wasn't the data available? So it's a little bit chicken and egg, and we're seeing that even now because some of them do have that functionality, but there's nothing to put in it, and the data is pretty empty. But it must exist somewhere, right? Because it does exist in other places. I think the other thing you haven't touched on, two things actually. One is about the process, and even that word process makes it sound like it's a sequence of events that's a really nice straightforward thing in the studio, and how that's perhaps not simple. I'm not going to pretend I understand it in depth, but if paper and email and tools like that are the kind of primary thing, then I'm sure that's very difficult, and I'm sure you guys can talk about how that's getting better. But the other one has been a way of passing this stuff around. There is a kind of supply chain that goes all the way, and with the advent of digital music, that supply chain has got quite long, all the way from somebody who whether it's a studio or a bedroom, whatever it is, comes up with some music, through a record company that does some stuff with it, maybe through different bits of a record company, if it's a really big one, potentially through some kind of distributor type party, and then on to someone else who might be aggregating it again or selling it or actually displaying it to the consumer. And there's a number of steps in there, and all it takes is slight differences in the databases between the different parties, and stuff gets lost along the way unless you have got a standard. And waving my other kind of job as a board member of DDEX, acronym, pause, don't worry. Who's heard of DDEX? Show of hands. Hopefully not too many, okay. Doesn't actually stand for anything, really.
I didn't think it did.
Yeah, I know. Digitizing data, something or other. It's a digital data exchange. Thank you, Peter. It's a consortium, actually, is the legal term. Consortium of organisations from across the music industry. It's more than, I think we're up to several hundred, if not multiple hundreds of members. From record companies, publishers, societies, digital service providers, aggregators, all kinds of other companies who have all clubbed together. It's a not-for-profit. And it just develops standards for the way in which data should be captured and exchanged about music. So standardizing terminology. So, for example, the term producer is a great one because does that mean someone who's in a studio, or does that in the European context mean the record company that commissioned the recording? So having standardized terminology, so we distinguish that as a studio producer versus an initial producer, and having a standardized format. So when you put all this stuff in, you have a common structure that says things like, concepts of a recording has many contributions, which have many instruments, and having a very common way, almost like a common form in which that data can be exchanged. And DDEX has been around for the last 10 years, but having achieved sort of traction in the very digital bit of the supply chain, it has more recently moved on to other things. And about 2.5 years ago, launched a standard called RIN, which Gebre mentioned earlier. His first product was named in the same way.
Which stands for?
Recording Information Notification. Sexy name. That was all about providing, yeah, I'm not surprised, all about providing a common way in which that data can be captured and then exchanged between, whether it's between different studios, different tools, different companies, but you know that if the receiving party can take it, can accept that same standard, then they're going to be able to manage all that data. I've always thought of it as a bit like the kind of 3-pin socket, 240 volts, 50 hertz electric standard, in that if we didn't have that, on its own, it kind of doesn't do anything, but there wouldn't be any market for like lamps and electric fans and all the stuff that, as a manufacturer, you can come along and now you can make something and it will work because there is a standard and you know what it is and it has a specification. It's kind of like exactly the same. Before that, if you didn't have a standard, how would you be confident that two things were interoperable? So PPO is very passionate about this stuff. As I said before, we have all of this data in order to pay out the money. So it's really important to us that we can exchange data with other organizations and not lose anything and have standards for doing so. And I think it's really great that it has enabled some of these great things to happen more recently.
No doubt. I'd like to paint this picture for you. A few months ago, I was at Warner Records Archives near Los Angeles. And we go in, and I got to hold the digital tape, where the first digital recording, where it was recorded. I got to hold the master tape of Prince's Purple Rain. Just amazing what they have, going back to the 50s. And someone there was telling me that the further you go back in music history, the more information is available about the recordings, because it used to be part of our practice. It used to be part of what we did every day. There was a log. You would enter this information. It was part of the discipline of being a producer and engineer, working in a studio, collecting this information. But when the digital revolution came around, the music industry was suffering. We were dealing with survival. With the demise of CDs and the retail store closings and the peer-to-peer file sharing, we were struggling with those kinds of details rather than innovation and solving problems. So with the digital revolution, it's almost like we were just on pause for innovation for a while. And so this practice of collecting this information in the studio was lost. And now is the time where we gain that back. And, as Nicholas was talking about here, when you all have probably heard these kinds of panels in the past, and it gets complicated. We get into all the alphabet soup that's there with all the acronyms and all the details. But really, in this era, our responsibility as tech leaders is to abstract that away from you. You shouldn't have to know ISNI and IPN and the RIN and DDEX and any of that. You should need to enter the information that you need to enter in that moment, and it needs to be easy for you. And that's one thing I look forward to changing in these kinds of conversations as we go, is that we're not drawn into this alphabet soup. We're not drawn into all the details. We're talking more about the practice and something that you can today do every day and in your work.
I'm not sure I agree with you, Gebre, because I want people thinking about these terms and knowing them so that and understanding them, so that when they look at the potential, software or services that they could be using, they're asking good questions like, yeah, but does your one do that thing? Like, is it compliant with that standard? Will it be able to pass that information on? Because otherwise there's a risk that whatever either information that they enter or about them, if they're musicians, doesn't go any further, actually.
Some will want to get to that level of interest. And if they do, then the information should be there and should be be transparent. But a lot of people that get into music, they don't want to be like accountants for metadata. They want to play their role. They're artists. They want to focus on what they're doing. And for those folks, if we don't make this simple for them, then they just don't use it. And that was, I remember when DDEX released the REN standard, we had some programming in our region about it. And you just look at the faces of everyone gloss over as you talk about these details, and they're like, what, it's XML? Like, do I have to code in order to enter my credit into this? No, of course not. We have to get it to a level of abstraction where it's easy for them. And definitely have the
You're right, it's somewhere in
transparency.
between, isn't it? In the same way that when someone buys a phone, they're going to look at it and they're going to go, yeah, but has it got the old USB or has it got the new one? Because I want one with a new one.
I mean,
Is that kind of level?
I can see that, but it is important that you know your identification number. I mean, how many times do you have to fill in your social security number or national insurance number, for anything that you do? I think that it's not too much to ask music creators to get. I mean, obviously, I don't know my IPN number or IPI number by heart, but I've got it in my mobile. So if I ever, if I'm at a session or if I'm doing a writing session, I've got it. Or even if I'm, the few times I log on to the PRS or PPL site, sorry about that. Then I know what to look for.
The lovely My PPL site.
Sorry?
The lovely My PPL site.
Oh, yes.
I've just spotted we've got a question at the back, and I'm quite keen to hear the questions as they come up. Actually, as we've already covered quite a lot of ground. Do you want to? Oh, we're gonna squeeze in with the boom or anything.
So, question. So, if I'm self-releasing, obviously I'm in charge of submitting all the metadata and information myself. But as a producer, if I'm doing something for a third-party record label, whoever that might be, and they're the people that are charged with, registering and submitting all the data, how do all these platforms feed into that? Because ultimately, I can chase them. I can say, "Oh, put me on this." But I'm relying on someone else to submit that data for me. So, how do all these platforms help that? Because obviously, let's say I'm producing something and it gets released sort of like 6 months down the line, and I'm not submitting the data. How does that work?
Well, can I do it? So one of the things, obviously, if that label works with VEVA would take care of all that metadata and archiving verification. If they don't, there's obviously you can check on the PPL site if it has been registered properly. You can contact PPL if there is a discrepancy. But I understand the whole thing. I mean, if you're working on a lot of different records, it's very time consuming. But what all of us basically why we're here is because we want to make sure that you don't have to chase that out. Once you enter that data, then that would go seamlessly into whichever organization or a record label that needs to pay you.
I would say that we need to, now it gets more on the complicated side, because when we're talking about this, first, now you're talking about studio producer, but we need to talk about the two different sides of what we call a song. We have a recording and we have a composition, and they're all linked together in one way. But your question is really good, because where the information goes in different directions, and how can we make sure that it ends up in the right place? And now it gets hard. First, we need to know that the people you work with, there's an expression that we use that we say authoritative source. You need to know that a guitar player you bring in, who is in charge of that person's information? Is it the guitar player itself, or is it a manager behind that? Who should you talk to get the right data? If you're in the US, for example, most of the time you need to talk to a manager to get the data. So you need to first make sure that you have the right data and you have the right numbers. Then it's a question of if we're talking about the recording, who owns the master? Is it do it yourself, you're going to release it through an aggregator, then it's your responsibility to make sure that you have all this information right. If you're working for a label, it's actually your responsibility to deliver the information to them. considering the recording, but for the composition, it's a whole different side of it. To release something, if you're self-releasing, if you do it yourself and you're recording someone else's song, you need to have permission from them to release an original song. So if it's 5 songwriters, now you need to make sure who is the authoritative source of the songwriters and get permission from each and one of them to release the song. So here it gets complicated, and what we all want to achieve here is a simple solution where you can get all this information and get all those approvals in as simple way as possible. But it gets pretty complicated to get hold of all those authoritative sources to get everything right. Because Matt needs to get that data and link to a number that we call ISRC, which is the identifier for this recording, and what are the IPNs, or the legal names if it's US based, for the people that really participated on the recording. And who is the right person that can say, because that is a discussion on its own, who can say on a recording which people did actually participate on a recording. There might be a couple of musicians that were part in the beginning, and the studio producer actually had those recordings in the recording, but the mixing engineer decided to mute 2 of the tracks. Now they're not participating anymore. And now I've also seen mastering engineers that are mastering based on stems, so they can actually start muting things in the mastering process. So it gets a bit complicated. So you need to find the right source of the data all the time and be sure that if you own the master, you are responsible for getting this information together. I don't know if it answers your question, but...
Yeah, it does. I think also the question mark is if I'm not the authoritative source, and I sort of make a claim and say, hey, by the way, I played keys on this track. Yeah. Is that then up to the record label to sort of... Are you then relying on someone within the record label to go, oh, yeah, that's right, they did? But obviously, with it being a transient industry, if people have moved on, then obviously it gets kind of crazy. And what I was hoping was that one of these sort of platforms is sort of kind of the authoritative source where it sort of everything feeds into that. And so, but then obviously someone would have to verify it. Same with PRS. If someone's registered something with PRS and you sort of claim, writer's credit on that, then that would have to be verified, but with whoever registered it in the first place.
And it gets to what we hear from the organizations like PPL and from the PRSs and all the CMOs is that there's too many entry points of data. Data is added on so many different places. And what we all try to achieve here is to gather that data so you enter it in one place. And as a creator, you don't have to think about it anymore. It goes to the right person, the authoritative source that can sign off and make sure that the data is sent forward. But now it gets a bit tricky. We need to keep track of who is the actual authoritative source down to each performer, to the guitar player, to the background singer. But that is what we try to achieve. So it's going to be super simple in the studio.
Mm. Would you say, just kind of listening to what you've said there, is there a kind of a need for an almost a bit of a cultural shift in, when we've got something like DDEX and RIN, which are there to establish standards. Establishing standards is one thing, but actually kind of encouraging people, all of those steps along the chain to actually use there's these standards and everyone needs to use them. I can see from, as this discussion is progressing, there's as producers and musicians, as the kind of the creators of the music and songwriters, as the creators of the music, there seems to be a responsibility on our part to at least know about these things and be creating those records, not musical records, but this is the metadata. Metadata is all the stuff that's around the recording.
But we protect us, creators. Yeah. We protect. Now, if I can say we, since I've been a songwriter for many years, we protect ourselves in our own world, saying that what we do is so unique, and we only care about the creative side of it.
The art.
Yeah. But if we were waiters in a restaurant, we would never go there without knowing how much we get paid per hour, and we would never leave without giving a time report for how many hours we were there, because without that we don't get our salary. So not giving this data is equal not filling in a time report.
I like that. That's a very well kind of it's a great kind of analogy. That the stamping the time card, isn't it? It's like I've worked this many hours, so I am owed this much.
But I think the producers do have a lot. I mean, this is really the that's where it all. They're like the directors. You know, they know who's come in and who's come out, and with like a platform like VEVA, where you can easily kind of log everything in the session. Then you have a history of, who's played on what, and obviously in the stems as well with the plugin, so that you can keep track. You don't have to kind of go back at the end when you've made the record and try to remember who played who played what on what track. I think that there's what kind of bothers me, if we go back to the DSPs or whatever, like when Spotify started showing credits, that's when you really it kind of opened the the box, and you realize how bad it was.
Yeah, when Spotify started showing credits, but actually just showed, I think, the absolute bare minimum legal responsibility that they could possibly get away with.
Exactly, and it's also because it comes from the label. It's not, that doesn't match who gets paid in the end. It's just, basically like whatever the information that the label has given them. But the thing that kind of got me, because when I looked at all my records, and it was, I would say 75% of my records were either incomplete, wrong, or like nothing in there. The artist was like the label, the producer, the writer, the everything, which clearly was not true. But then when it says, just to get back to your question, when it says, if you have is there something wrong or whatever, report a problem, and then you click on that, it's like, talk to the record label. Cheers, like, who at Universal should I call up about this to? Who is going to care about this part? And I think that's is frustrating.
Yeah. And Josh, from your experience at JAXSTA, you've been going into, as I understand it, you've been going into labels, and I think the term that I watched a video yesterday your CEO used, ingesting this data. How is there a lot of kind of, are you finding some of it is complete or near complete and kind of completely compliant to DDEX RIN, and is it some of it's just sort of like, there's the artist and every other data field is completely empty? What's been your experience of that?
Thanks for bringing that up. I realised that in my introduction I did not reference the fact that we only pull in data from official sources, so sources that we've deemed authoritative, be that the publishers, labels, distributors. So we work with all those various parties to ingest this data. We call them our data partners. And yeah, I've seen an example just this week of a new release. I won't name the album, won't name the label, but the credits that we received. So these are official credits from the label that are in the supply chain. So we're an endpoint. It was missing all performer data, and this artist also shared around the release the actual credits from the album. Someone collected all the credits for all the performers, all the studios that the 12 songs were recorded at, and structured it, delivered it to the label. It clearly made it to the art department, but somehow didn't make it into the supply chain feed that we get. And this is part of, I think, a broader problem as everything did transition from physical to digital. There's this period, and to Gebre's point as well, you go further back and the credits sort of get better, and then there's this period of, I don't actually know how many years, I haven't done that much analysis yet, but trust me, we're definitely doing that currently.
There's a significant amount of time
when there's a dip in the quality Well, I wouldn't, not so much quality, it's just the depth of information.
Sure. Would you say on the whole, I mean, you're alluding to the idea that perhaps things are starting to get better now. I mean, are you finding that that's the case?
Well, like I said, that release was literally, the album came out this week or last week. So,
but at least somebody,
at least they do exist. This is the frustrating part of what we do. We know the credits are somewhat, not in every case, but we know they can be found, whether that's in the label copy, going back through art department archives. It's just getting them into a structured data set that can be delivered to a DSP or a JAXSTA. Sorry, yeah.
It's something that, I mean, what hits me when we're talking here, we're talking about distribution, or about Spotify's, we're talking about DDEX, PPL, record labels, and how they work together to make things work, and they do it brilliantly. But what we don't talk about is that it's not only how music distribution has changed, music making has changed. We say we go back in the vault, Warner's vault, and say back in the 50s. Yeah, but those guys were in one studio during one day, did a song, and it was pretty easy. I mean, I don't know how many sessions I've done through Skype with people that I never met, and it's produced in somewhere that I'm not even know where it is, and I hopefully get to hear the song someday. So we must talk about the new way of how we're making music, and that sometimes is actually, as much as I can talk about it in the DDEX environment as well, that we can not only talk about fixing problems within the industry, we need to talk about the problems how we feed the industry with information, and that is up to us. That is no DDEX going to solve that. We need to do things together to try to solve that. And with that said, of course not. I mean, we cannot set DDEX rules for how a song can be written. You can only be 3 people, equal share one day. If you don't follow that, the song is not going to be released. Of course, that's not going to happen. We need to be open. We can never let this interfere on the creative side. Never, never, never. We need to do what we do in the way we want it to do, but we need to find the system where we can make sure that this, boring side of the industry, important boring side of the industry, can live in the same time as we can be creative in the way we want to be creative. And that's the challenge. And in the music industry, and all of us here knows exactly how complicated it is on a political level. Like, you're dealing with that company, then you cannot talk to that company, that organization cannot blah, blah, blah. And so to solve these political issues in the music industry is very complicated. But I would say to solve adoption within this group, that is 100 times more complicated, to get creators to change behavior. And there is something you said, what can we do to just, what do we need to do here? And that is something I think we should spend time talking about. What can we do? And you guys are the only ones that can say, what do you need to be able to do this? And what do you need to understand what you need to do?
Yeah, so we as music creators, we need to become advocates for this, creating this culture of gathering the data at source. The problems of whether that data gets corrupted or lost along the way, or is perhaps a different. We can't be responsible for the failings further down, failings or successes. Sometimes I'm sure it works well. But yeah, what are... Can
I just say, because I think that there are things that we can do, and this is like with me, with my IRIS Academy basket hat on too. I think that a lot of what we're doing here today, educating ourselves, is really, really important. That's the first step, to know A, that there is a problem, and B, where the problems lie. Even if there's there are obviously many different problems along the line. But there was one thing that we were discussing earlier, and which kind of refers to what Nicholas was saying about the political thing. Also, when you realize that different organizations are holding on to their data, so you've got the issue there where, because data, everybody realizes it's worth something. And of course, PPL has been investing a lot of money in and I would say, as somebody who's dealt with a lot of different, and I come from Sweden as well, so I've dealt with Sami, the Swedish one, and PPL, it really is in the forefront of when it comes to solving these problems, and they've made huge investments, and they're actually very open to collaborating. But there are other PROs and CMOs, as in performing rights organizations and collective management organizations.
Great jargon busting there.
Yeah.
Very good. Straight on it.
PPLs of other countries and PRSs of other countries that are not like that and are very afraid that they will be obsolete if they share their information. And I think if we as creators, because I think a lot of the time if music creators knew that this was happening with their own PROs or CMOs, they would be up in arms, because it's one of the reasons they don't get paid. How are they going to get paid if like the PPL of Greece, now I'm using, which probably if it's anything like the PRO in Greece or in Spain, God forbid, if they don't share their information with PPL, how are they going to get paid?
I don't think we should pick on any countries. I think we should be,
Let's do
be political.
And zooming out a bit, with this, the same German psychologist who came up with the learning curve also came up with the forgetting curve. And we forget things over time. Once you get to the end of the project, if you're the producer, it's easy to forget who did what. And so one of the things that our platforms offer is that you're collecting that information at the moment it happens. And one thing we discuss with our users, we try to make this message as clear as we can, is collect what you know when you know it. If you don't know every detail, if you don't know every identifier, if you don't know every bit of everything to make everything authorized, get what you can in the moment. And we're making tools for you that make that as easy as possible. And we'll be continuously making that easy as possible for you. In the current moment in the music industry, we do have a political fight that we have to, that we face to make sure that this information is accepted throughout the supply chain. And what helps us more than anything is when you take up this practice and show that you're willing to do this, and you deliver something in that format, deliver a RIN to, if you're working with anyone, deliver that RIN. Even if they don't want to take it, tell them about it. At the worst, if you use Sound Credit, you can print out a PDF and deliver the information that way if they don't want to take the RIN. So they have some way that they can use the information, and you're still able to get the benefit of collecting things in the moment easily. So,
sorry, can I just kind of zoom in on a little bit more? Do you zoom in or out? I can't remember. But so what you're talking about there is that's actually the creation of the RIN, and the RIN is a is it a file, or is it any file that contains the standard? It'd be good to kind of just clarify that.
Sure thing. So a RIN file, it's a .rin file that contains credits. Under the hood, it's an XML schema, and it's just an XML file. But it's also doc files from Microsoft Word are the same way. Doc files from Microsoft Word are actually zip files of XML files. Kind of strange, but that's what's there. We are thinking a little bit. We love the RIN standard, and everything has been based on that as we've been going. But we emphasize that less now, because you're loading a file, you're saving a file, you're exporting a file. When you're using Microsoft Word, you don't really think about the docx format. It's not really important for you, not that important. It just happens to be the file extension. So for you, it's, as you're working, you're just collecting those credits. You can export a .rin file, which contains those credits and information in a structured way, and in a way that is going to be long lasting. When Matt was talking about DDEX and the standardization that brings and the consortium that was there, we're talking Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Pandora, Universal, Warner, ASCAP, BMI, and like 30 others. They're all are members of this organization. They're all part of that. So the movement is present, and for 10 years working on these kinds of standards. So it's time for us to use the tools that use the standard, and start applying that pressure throughout the supply chain to make sure that we get the credits.
I think it's interesting. At the moment, it's a two-way thing because as you say, there's partly an onus around the people who are there at the beginning, who obviously want to see this data go in, like the guy at the back who wants to know, if I capture that data or if I'm in it, how do I make sure that it does go further down? And it's just going to be a pressure thing, right? It's applying pressure, asking the questions, checking afterwards, and so on. At the other end, I think, as a consumer, I've got Alexa in my kitchen and I've got one of the Google ones in my study. I think that's really interesting how I now talk to it. We listen to a lot more music in the kitchen than we used to, and a broader spectrum of music. That all of that kind of the new wave of voice-activated stuff, all of these streaming services are hitting the point where they've got so many users already that they have to start competing on, it's not just about finding people that haven't signed up already. You've got to go, how do I steal some people from the other one? Well, I have better features. What are my features? Well, it's like better recommendations and discovery and navigation. So they want this stuff now because that's how they're going to compete with each other. So their pressure starts to go the other way, and then record labels start going, oh, well, actually, the more data I've got, the more easy it is to find my content, so I get more of a share of the streams than that guy over there. So they want to push the data. And we've sat in, I think about 6-7 months ago, I sat in a room with 200 people at DDEX, talking about how would we have a new standard, again, less this time about the creations, because we're kind of like, well, we've done that bit a little bit, we need people to use it, but we've done that. Now looking at what about the wider kind of metadata that you might use when you're interacting with music by voice. So actually, why can't I ask Alexa to play the song from the last John Lewis Christmas ad, or to tell me like what's top of the charts at the moment, or like to tell me, to ask actually by songwriter, all the kind of creative stuff. To call things like the White Album, to use names and words that aren't necessarily the exact text that it got, printed on the CD. I can't do any of that because there is no way of actually conveying that information. It's quite complicated. It's not like an obvious form that you could fill in. So all these people got together, came up with some great ideas, worked on that, and actually that is another new DDEX standard which will get published hopefully in a couple of months' time, if not before, specifically to enable much richer navigation by voice. So again, that provides the ability. It works the same for all of the different streaming services, so they'll all come up with features really quickly. It works the same for all the record companies, so they'll start trying to rapidly gather this information as quickly as possible. For all their artists, they'll be going through the thing, thinking, how do I type in what awards they've got? How do I, describe the number of platinums they've had, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to go backwards, and then people will, it'll be right back to the studio, and before long, people are being asked questions like, oh, actually, can you capture this extra bit of information, please, because we want to pass it through. So I think as well as pressure from the bottom of the chain, as it were, I'm not sure I want to call it the bottom, from one end of the chain,
at source.
Front line.
That's what you say.
Sorry, that was unintended. From one end of the chain, there's also the kind of pull from the other end of the chain. Very, very exciting time at the moment.
So, Tommy, did you have a question?
I just want to make 2 points, actually. The first point was kind of to follow what you've just said. One of the things that the panel hasn't actually addressed is the fact that I believe, the reason why I sort of created the credit where credit was due thing of 10, 15 years ago, whenever we all did it with MPG, was because what I realised was my own personal journey as a producer was very much led by credits, because what credits did was they allowed me to draw comparisons with stuff. So I could see that this artist or this drummer, played on that record and then played on that record. And it was a journey that I went with them. And I realized that the music business as a whole was missing a trick here, because the whole music business really have been built on this concept. Jazz, reggae, hip hop. Those styles of music are built on the concept of drawing lines between artists and performers. And so I realized that was a big thing that was getting lost. And I'm really interested to hear that, because I think to this day, I still don't see the music business using that as a marketing tool. The whole basis of the music business, they've lost. So that's the first point. The second point I wanted to make was, unfortunately, I've heard all this for the last 10 years. I've heard everyone saying what you guys are all saying, but nothing is getting done. We're still hitting a brick wall here. And we're still hitting a brick wall because there are too many people, there are too many things, and it is too wide. And one of the reasons why there are so many credits and so much information available to us from up to the 50s and the 60s was because there was one kid who had to do it all. And that was the assistant who was in the studio, who had to document all the stuff in the studio, how it was recorded, because you needed it. Because if you wanted to go back to that sound, you had to have it. So how would the panel address this concept of simplifying? I mean, you can simplify it through that, I agree. But there needs to be, the thought process needs simplifying so that we can then push that out. Because at the moment, for me, it's just too wide. There's too much going on.
I've got to almost just throw that question back to you. You know, for us, we're working to make this process as easy and as unintrusive as possible, while also balancing to make sure that the data quality is as complete as is needed down the supply chain. So that's a careful balance to strike. Someone will have to take some action. Like until we get into maybe in 2080 or something, or further into the future, maybe we'll figure out some way of just detecting people's contributions as they happen with AI or something. But realistically, somebody's going to have to take action. And so, with us, again, trying to make that as easy as possible. How do you view it? Is this something that you're willing to take on as part of your practice? Do you put an assistant on it? How do you see?
I think there's two ways. From what I could see, there's two ways that you can do it. The two sources need to be it's got to be education. So the two sources are education at all the levels. So, pretty much every kid that gets into the music business now has gone on some course or another. It should be absolutely part of the whole course, whatever course you take. Business, production, songwriting, engineering, twiddling knobs, whatever. You have to have, at the start of the course, this is how you get paid, kids. Mm-hmm. This is it. And that's the first one. And then, the second one has to be at the labels. Because I, for me, have found it very difficult dealing with labels, because they don't really have the education process. There's very rarely is there one person in a label that's job is specifically to do that.
So with that, on the education side of it, we're continuing to scale that. So we started with an iBook/ebook that was written by some of the people at Blackbird Academy in Nashville, and that's available on our site, and to a number of institutions now that are teaching sound credit as part of their courses. So that's a part where we absolutely agree. The education component has to be there. For the label support, there's not a person from a label on this panel. I wish we could hand the microphone to them about that with a little bit of a look, But I would say with that, the best that we can do in this room right now, and trust me, I think everyone on this couch right now is putting all the pressure on labels that we can about this.
And it's also, I share your frustration totally. But when I hear your question, we need to realize a few things. I mean, if we go back in the days, we can go back just 10 years. There was a different situation. Music was created we said we had one person in the studio that collected the data. Today, what is the definition of a studio? It's a bedroom. I mean, that's a new thing. The amount of songs. There's 15,000 releases per day on Spotify. And how do you define a label? It's it's in a new world. Well, that's my point. Yeah. So, but you're right. How do we solve it? And I think technology is. I mean, we solve a lot of things with technology, and I mean, we all work on different solutions for doing this. But I have also realized one thing, and I mean, I'm a creator myself. We can deliver plugins or apps or whatever, but the majority of you will not start using it. And that's the bitter fact. So, but we are going to continue fighting, doing things to make it simple. And I mean, to promote what we're doing together with Pro Tools right now. We're going to try, because we realized during the years that we've been doing this, that we cannot even get creators to download an app.
Yeah, on that, how many people in this room right now have tried either Renim, Sound Credit, Audley, or VEVA Sounds offerings? Okay, so just take a look around there. I mean, there is usage going on, and it is significant out there in the world. A lot of your peers are actually starting to use these platforms. So that's part of this today, is that if you take nothing else away from this, I mean, we've done everything we can to make our platforms easy, and it doesn't stop there. This is something we'll continue to raise the simplicity of it. Again, it has to be balanced with what's needed down the supply chain, so it's always the balance that we have to strike. But if you leave with nothing else, it's that try the platform. What can we do to push things forward? It just gets down to that. If you haven't tried one of these platforms, when you go home tonight, when you go to work tomorrow, well, you may or may not be working tomorrow. I don't know what you're doing, but
the next step we're doing to do it, we know that it's going to be complicated to have creators to download an app or do whatever. So, we announced this at South by. So we're now going to try something that we call auto present detection. So with Pro Tools, creators in the studio, you need to be, for this feature, you need to be in the studio. Pro Tools is going to auto recognize if you are in the room. You don't even have to take up your phone out of your pocket. And we have this, it's based on Wi-Fi technology, and please don't ask me the background of it because I don't know tech at all, but my engineer's done an amazing job, and it actually works. So when you walk into the studio engineer gets a message in Pro Tools like, this person walked in, this person normally plays guitars and writes lyrics, is that correct? Click, boom, and we have the connection. So we're trying. So, but this is something that we need adoption from you guys. And I love that you bring it up, because we need to discuss what can we do?
No silver bullet. I think it's a combination of jigsaw pieces, whether it's improvements in awesome tools like you guys have, whether it is commercial incentive in that people will start to want this data. In PPL's case, we gave commercial incentive a couple of years ago when we made it mandatory so we rely on record companies or the recording rights holder to register the information with us, and that also obliges them to register the performer information. We made it mandatory to give us some performer information, and I think from 2016 onwards for UK music, UK commissioned music. And if they don't provide any performer information, then we don't pay. We hold back the money. It's very obvious. Record company could see exactly how much money is being held back, and then they know to release it, they need to add performer information. But that as well is not a silver bullet, because there'll be all kinds of reasons why that information wasn't available or why it's difficult. And while things are improving, it's not a complete solution. We have also rolled out, I think, technology, your point, and you mentioned AI, which is artificial intelligence, Dan.
Thank you very much for your diligence there.
We
appreciate that.
Just in case,
artificial intelligence, everyone.
Just in case.
AI.
We rolled out, we've been experimenting with that a little bit. We hired a data scientist, really cool job. We rolled out an internal, it's called a recommendation engine. We nicknamed it Edison, after the grandfather of the sound recording. We're not allowed to say we named it Edison because somebody else has a software product called Edison, it turns out, and we're a copyright organization, so we really can't kind of go there. So we fondly nicknamed it Edison, but we get 40,000 new recordings a week registered in this database. And we've got a team of people who do quality assurance and who will go and look for missing performers, who process claims that we get in, but there are only a number of them. They cannot eyeball every single registration we get. It's just not possible. So what we have is this recommendation engine. It uses the 15 million registrations that we already have and all of the data on those to basically build a kind of machine learning model, a bit techie, but it's kind of training it. And then for every new registration that comes in, it compares it to all the historical data. And it's looking for really obvious things like there is a band called Coldplay and it typically has 4 members and these are the things they do. And if it spots one that comes in that has, either a 5th featured musician or has only got 3, then it will flag it and then that gets prioritized for our data quality team. So rather than sort of having 40,000 recordings a week, where do I even start? There's a kind of prioritized list that says, look, these are the ones that we think are really unusual. It could be right, it could be entirely legitimate, and maybe it's fine, but it's something that we should definitely look at. And those are the kind of things, so we can do extra stuff to kind of work around the gaps and what we can, but the preference is always, how do you get the data as good as possible from the very beginning, from the people that actually made the music?
What did we have a question at the back? I thought I saw a hand.
Are these lack of credits as much of an issue in the broadcast and film industries as they are in the music industry?
No, from my view of this and conversations with others, we're squarely in the music industry, but from conversations with others, there's more standardized practices around film where this is not nearly the issue.
It was kind of a rhetorical question because it's so heavily unionized and regulated in broadcast, and the music industry is still the Wild West, basically, isn't it?
Volume of content as well, right?
So is it a legislation issue that you could legislate that things must be credited on release, otherwise there's a breach of statutes that have been put in place?
I think it's an interesting thing that you're bringing up because this is something that we've looked at or that we discuss a lot in particular when it comes to on the composition side, because with the way we kind of look at it, if you go into Tesco can't sell you an egg sandwich and say, we don't know where the eggs came from, where the mayo came from, where the bread came from. We'll figure it out later. So we're kind of like, how come that is okay in the music industry that a label or a distributor can, put up a record on a music service without having all the data in there of who to pay. And every time that we've brought that up, there's the kickback there's a kickback from labels saying, well, we want to get the record out as quickly as possible, and when it comes to we don't have time to chase all this metadata. We don't have time to see if because the songwriters haven't agreed on the splits yet, or they haven't agreed who actually is a writer on it yet. You could take like. Yeah, we've looked at it. Obviously, legislation is a difficult one because, I would prefer it to be that way. Legislation moves really, really slowly, however. Most people in the music industry would like it to be self-regulating, if that could in any way work. Because, I'm completely with you that would be the best solution. That could be like a long-term. It's something that you can actually explain to politicians. Politicians don't understand copyright. It's the most confusing thing ever. But if you kind of put it into the simple facts of like how can you sell something that you don't know who the supplier is, they are completely shocked that goes on in the music industry.
Have the MPG looked at this angle at all in terms of?
I wouldn't necessarily be the one to answer that. I can see certainly that a pitfall which I realise as you're speaking, Helienne, is that you've obviously got an issue of you might get the legislation through in one territory, but of course we're talking about a worldwide. It's a global music industry, of course.
And we also must, I told you, you're so right, and legislation, but let's say that you're an artist and you have a song that you love and you recorded it, and the two songwriters cannot agree on the split, and you are not allowed to release the song out on the market. You have a huge opportunity to get the song out, but the songwriters don't care. They don't get you don't get hold of the publisher, and that holds up the whole process. You don't get the approval from and how music is made today. It might be recorded by people so it's gonna be complicated. But I agree with you. But the way we make music today, it's complicated. To get like the information gathered in one place. See how many songs today that don't have an approved split, even if it's out on the market. And it's a lot of money involved, but the songwriters still don't talk about the split. So it's up to us as creators. I don't think that legislations put everything. Labels should have responsibilities, yes. But again, a label like a major, like Universal, will never hold up a release where they put a lot of money into because a couple of songwriters don't want to talk about the split.
Of course, so irrespective of how much work we do as engineers and mixers and writers, if the labels are still going to be, I'm releasing this, I don't care if it's not a complete set of credits, all our work is in vain, really, isn't it? And as Tommy said, with labels, it's kind of Wild West as well. No one will accept that they have to do the credits for that album or that single or whatever. So at every kind of turn, you end up with a person who's going, well, it isn't my job, is it?
And
they absolve themselves of any kind of responsibility to actually do so.
This gets into the chicken or egg thing with the labels. Like, do you do a platform like this, and are we forced to get the labels on board as partners before we can actually do adoption, or do we have adoption first? Like, which one is it going to be? And that chicken or egg thing is complicated. That was part of the reason with Sound Credit that we did a public database so that independent artists and producers can publish credits themselves, so we could get a little bit out of chicken or egg and have some entries and have them be public, to add that pressure. So that's there. And with, the feeling that's in this room, if your friends at labels, when you're interacting with labels, let them know, voice this. You can voice it to your legislators, but I'll tell you, voicing it to those labels tomorrow, voicing it to those labels next week is going to be a lot more effective. And, one thing I'd like to say too is that I feel like this conversation, it was mentioned just a bit ago about, we hear these conversations about credits. We've been hearing them for 10 years, and we have. But this conversation is a lot different. We're not just swimming in alphabet soup here tonight. This is a very different conversation, and it's getting squarely on one thing, is we need to get the labels.
Sure. Just to kind of give Josh, perhaps who hasn't said quite so much at the moment, but I think perhaps this is a nice way to perhaps round the discussion off. Do you think from the answer is, because you're, as I understand it, you're a bit more kind of consumer facing than the rest of you guys perhaps. Yeah. Is perhaps, in your opinion, do you think consumer demand is going to is a way of pressure being placed on the labels?
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you guys are?
Well, just quickly to jump in on in defence of the labels, it's definitely an awareness, as far as I can tell, that the data is pretty poor, and there's a willingness to clean that up across the catalogue, but then also going forward. And there are various pieces of legislation, like the US Music Modernisation Act. Over here, we've the EU, the Article 13, now known as Article 17.
Another rebrand.
Yeah, another renaming. So the labels definitely are aware of what's happening, and I think there's some serious willingness to take some action. But yeah, in terms of consumers driving this, as Matt suggests, I think a lot of people now have smart speakers, and that's their primary source of interacting with music in the home. So in that sense, consumers are sort of indirectly driving demand for credits. But from our perspective, we definitely think people still care about who played guitar on a particular track, who recorded it, who engineered it, and not just from an A&R perspective or from a collaboration perspective. We've sort of drawn on this idea earlier that that theme of a guitarist playing on across various tracks, that idea of going into a record store, and finding out that this person also worked on your favorite album from over here, and it's not the obvious people in most cases. So we're recreating that experience by bringing credits back to the forefront. We've sort of reimagined the liner notes in a digital context, and it's provides a sort of deep dive digital experience purely around credits. And we obviously wouldn't be building this if we didn't think there was a demand for it from the consumers, the fans. So yeah, I think I think these conversations tend to go a little bit negative and looking at everything that's wrong and why is it wrong and how can we fix it. But I'm more so, I've been doing this for JAXSTA for 3 years, and I'm more optimistic than ever that this is all heading in the right direction. I mean, the fact there's so many people working, and we're just four of several.
Five.
Probably, yeah.
It's five.
No, but I'm just talking on the tech perspective.
Oh, yeah,
sorry.
of course, yeah.
No, Matt's. Yeah. Well, No, PPL obviously more important than all of us, arguably. But we're just five of many companies working on this. So I think it's getting better exponentially.
So it sounds like you're optimistic.
Yeah, very.
I think we all should be. The music industry is generating more money than we've ever, seen in a very long time. And wait another 5 years until I heard a number that in 5 years' time, 87% of the whole world's population will get streamed music in one way or another. That we will see so much money in this industry. So it's really positive. And we will continue working to make solutions. But what can we do? What we can do today, start today, is to just, if you do it with any of our solutions, or if you use a spreadsheet or pen and paper, start taking notes and the info when it happens in the studio. So you have it and provide it to the people that needs it. That's the first step, and we can start today. And that's what I say to everyone. We are providing digital platforms and solutions, but we don't change human behaviors. We need a bit of change in how you guys interact with us or with the industry with the data. So start collecting the data. That's what I would recommend, actually.
Can I ask a question, Dan?
Oh, go on then, Peter. Last question. Go on.
In a way, it's not really a question. I just want to say how grateful I am to see everybody here interested in this subject. I've been interested in it for about 22 years, and to have all these people actually engaging with it, especially from the point of view of being a studio producer, as we now call ourselves. We are the key people who can provide authority data at the mix stage, even though you've had an awful lot of people in the recording studio who may well have made a contribution, be it on a stem or be it on a master mix. Only you can verify who was on that track. And it might be that your contracts actually specify that's your responsibility. So yes, you have to do this, and you have to do it in great detail. And I wonder whether you guys can help us guys do something. I know that I've always argued that the data that we collect and we verify and provide authority for is useful because of that authority to PPL, right? And so our relationship with them should be more symbiotic in that you help each other. And,
can I change the question and ask you, because what you're saying is so smart, but what incentive as a mixing engineer, what incentive do you want and do you need to do that, to collect all the data?
You would be able to participate in neighbouring rights revenue as a part of the creation structure. The reason that MPG exists to a large extent is to lobby to be included as a part of that revenue receiving body that at the moment they're called non-featured artists. Some producers are very much featured artists because, as somebody said, they're directors. They're like film directors. They're the people that will pull in the contributions from all loads of disparate places and turn it into a commercial product. Now, only they will know who actually made that contribution. That's us. We are that they. You guys have in potential, a wonderful set of tools. They're all slightly different. I'm sure we don't want to buy them all. But what might be useful is that if you can apply yourself to organizations like this and say, okay, let's actually go for a response from the professionals that are doing it. Get the feedback from them. Give them the software to work on the basis that they're going to return it to you. Don't charge them for it, and also don't make 4 or 5 different versions, because that is going to be a pain in the ass. As people have actually hinted, the problem is not being able to do it, it's being asked to do it. I don't mean being asked, I mean being asked. You know, at the end of the day, you've had the band there all day, you want to go to the pub. We don't have tape ops anymore, because that used to be in the era of EMI and Decca. The poor tape op would have to stand back and fill in all the forms on the back of the boxes. That doesn't happen anymore. So if you can provide the software that makes our life so easy that we want to do it, and that it's automatic. I love Nick's idea about not even having to write in a profile, but a profile would come automatically from some sort of Wi-Fi connection. So you wouldn't, always have to go through that process each time. The other major connection that you need is after you've authorized the contributors to a mix, you have to connect those contributors to the ISRC, which is usually issued by the label 6 weeks after you've done your job. And the person who does that knows nothing about recording and doesn't really care because he's got another 300 to do that day. Right, so there is no connection between ISRC and the studio, and that has to be somehow
If we don't
contrived.
start with an early identifier temporarily before we get the ISRC.
Yeah,
Which
yes.
we,
A working ID. The other positive thing I would say, if you haven't got an ISNI, and you know what an ISNI is, go home tonight and get one for yourselves. Create an ISNI for yourselves via YouTube, because you can get it on YouTube. Register yourself with what you do, and you will have a unique number, and that's called an International Standard Name Identifier. If you haven't got one, it costs no money. Just go and get one and apply that to everything that you do, and tell all the people that you work with that they should get one too. It's simple, it's free, and it will protect your rights in the future.
I think we're going to have to end on that point, but a kind of a point of action there. So I'd just like to thank our panellists here. Thank you very much for coming along and breaking open the world of credits and diving in and zooming out and all the kind of things. This is not a conversation which we can kind of complete this evening. Perhaps it can never be a conversation that's finished. But I believe hopefully the panellists will be able to stick around for a little bit of time. You might be able to come up and ask them some questions that you didn't get a chance to answer, or perhaps didn't want to say in front of a crowd. So, and thank you all for coming. Thank you very much, and thanks to the church. I mean, yeah, that's just...